Right now I'm working on rewiring the power switch. Here is one wire coming from the AC outlet up to the power switch on the bottom of the volume control, and the other side had been going to a black wire that was attached to the chassis over here. Remember, I want to rewire it so it switches not the neutral side going to the chassis, but the hot side going to the voltage doubler. So I cut out that wire and I want to run another wire back down around and into my new little power supply strip. Well, that seems simple enough, right? Clip out this wire and then just run another wire down, but not quite so simple because there's something else attached to that lug. It goes over to one of the other controls, because remember, this is ground when the set is turned on. Why wouldn't they run a separate wire from that control right to ground, or why have it go to that switch? I don't know. Maybe to save on a couple inches of wire. Well, at any rate, what it means for me is I have to modify things. I need to take this wire off of this lug and run it over to ground on the chassis somewhere. And I can't really do that too easily because the controls are very hard to get out. I thought I would just take the nuts off and the controls could drop down and I'd get them out, but no, they're attached by other wires going to other things and I can't get at them, nor can I get at them from this side. So what I really got to do is take off this piece of metal, which is all isolated. So a couple 1/4-inch sheet metal screws off of this side. And to get it to one on this side, I had to take off this back control panel, which is just as well, because now I can get in there and check this resistor and maybe shoot some deoxit into the controls. And right now I got that out as well, so now I can get this up. Almost. Next challenge is I have to get these knobs back off, and then there's a wiring harness on here, but maybe I can leave that in place and just flip this over. After I clean these knobs, I made a point of putting a little dollop of grease on them, so I think, yep, alright, much easier to get them off this time around. Let's see, I think with a little bit of finesse. Oh geez, that is nothing easy. Boy, they must have really put this together in a very deliberate set of steps, because so many things are interconnected. Like, I can't take this off because there is a capacitor and resistor going from this to this. This is, I think, the only point where the floating part of the chassis touches the neutral part of the chassis. So I'm going to have to disconnect these two wires to get it out. And why do they have these here? Well, to bleed off static charge and I think any voltage transients that might build up on that, so you don't get a shock. Yeah, so let's see if I get those off. I think then, and there's a lip on the edge here, which makes that kind of annoying as well, but I think if I disconnect that and move this back a little bit, and I can get those up and then flip the whole thing out of the way and then get to those controls. Okay, get those disconnected. Now let's see. Alright, open that a little bit. Pop that up. And bend this over, maybe. Those wires are pretty thick. The wiring harness, though, is kind of, well, it's pop riveted on there, I suppose. These wires are also really gross and sticky. I've been cleaning off the wires as I've been going. What it is, I guess, from the heat of the type of plastic they use. I think I mentioned this before. They get really sticky, and all the dust over the years sticks to them. Okay. And there's another wire on this side connecting to it. But I think I can leave that attached, maybe. Phew, a pain. Alright, now I am at the controls, and now here is that offending wire going over here. So I want to cut this off, run along the wire over. And again, while I've got these out, take advantage of that to check this resistor, shoot some deoxit into the controls. So I get a better look at the tuner too. It's rather large, big thing. 2 tubes in it. Oh yeah, I'm really glad I did this because I remember now. There is a cap down in here. I had one heck of a time replacing that when I worked on my other T-102, because I don't think I went to this extent when I worked on that one. So I think if I disconnect this wire, I can get all 3 controls bent up and out of the way, and then I get that big cap down there, a bumblebee or whatever. Those plastic caps, it's got to go. Well, I'm way down in the rabbit hole now. I had noticed an issue earlier with the tuner with one of the tubes when I was testing them. It didn't seem to go in right, and after I tested and put it back in, I had to wiggle it a few times to get a good clear picture. And now I know why. It's because one of the pins is mushed up. So when it's about 11 o'clock in the upper left there. So I tried repairing it from topside with like a small screwdriver I've got to kind of bend things over, but unfortunately what's happened is that these tube, each little hole there has kind of 2 pieces of metal, and one of them has gotten folded over and smashed down inside. So maybe I can push it back out from the back side, but what I'd really like to do, well, ideally I'd like to replace the whole socket. I think that's just not going to happen, but maybe I can replace the pin if I can. Because the way these pins work is if you clean off the solder from the back side, you can actually push the whole thing through the other side, and you could actually replace it if you had another one of the same type. There's just slots cut into the socket, and each little connector there is pushed in individually, so they can be replaced without having to replace the whole socket. Well, because that requires getting down in there, which is not so easy to do, so these sides don't come off. Maybe, well, no. It's one of those things where it's kind of built up in layers from starting from the bottom and up, and to get back down to the lowest layer, not so easy. But what I think I can do without much trouble is to take out this drum. And I find it's kind of curious, if any of you guys have worked on Admirals or have seen my videos, they use a tuner that's actually somewhat similar. I'm talking about the older Admiral sets. They have snap-in strips of coils for each channel, and in this one they've kind of instead of using pluggable coil slugs, they have them mounted on these 2 discs here, but the rest of it is actually fairly similar. Same bit of spring steel and roller here with a piece of metal, like a cam metal, piece of metal with sort of notches cut into it that rides along in that wheel, and very similar fine-tuning mechanism. So it's actually not all that dissimilar. And this part mounts in the same way, just like the much earlier sets. Bend down this bit of springy metal wire, pop that one out, pop this other one out, and this whole thing should lift right out. And while it's out, just like everything else, I can clean it up and lube it. But boy, I do not dare start poking my fingers down around in there, because that would mean I would have to, I mean, it wouldn't be a lost cause. It would just mean that I would have to align the tuner, which is something I'd really rather not do. But because when you get that in there, the frequencies are so high, you just like move a component, like this, push this resistor over 1/4 of an inch, and you throw things off. You gotta be really, really careful when you work on these. So let's see, that pin, what exactly is it going to? Okay, it's this one right here. It's got a wire going straight over to that, which is a feed through that comes out right here. So that's interesting. It actually doesn't attach to anything inside the tuner, I don't think. It's just coming straight out over to this feed through. It's probably about the best case scenario. Well, actually, best case scenario would be if it was an unused pin. And problem solved, it just yanked the whole thing out. So it's easy to get at, especially if this was out of the way. All I got to do is cut that wire, unsolder it, and I could easily push through that pin. So now it's a matter of going through my junk drawers. Well, these are larger sockets, but, you know, find another socket, something like this, and get a pin out of it, and push it down in there. Replace that damaged one. Here it is the next day, and I've begun work on disassembling the tuner. Popped out the 2 pieces of spring wire that were holding this in, and then I removed the little roller ball. Now I should be able to get this out, but before I do, I had noticed that the fine tuning didn't seem to do much on this TV, and now I know why. There's kind of a fibrous disc here that rubs up against a brass piece, and that is the fine tuning. It forms a variable capacitor, and it's not doing much. You can see wear marks from where it used to turn. So unless I push down really hard, not even, it's starting to just catch there. So I think I need to free this up. It should be moving like so. So anyways, get this out. Put that aside. Don't want to mess up those slugs. Curious that there aren't 13 of them. You'd think there'd be one for each channel, but no, there's only 5. And see all these little inductors here. You definitely don't want to brush into one of those. I'm sure they were all hand adjusted to lock into the stations. Alright, put that aside. When I put this back together, I will clean off this old grease and put new grease on there, including this little guy. So I guess this is what actually forms the capacitor down in here. There is a metal plate with a wire going to it that runs over into here, and then this moves back and forth. So a very small, maybe fractional picofarad into several picofarads as that moves. Alright, so what I want to do is replace this pin. So I looked on the schematic. That is pin number 3 on this tube, which is a filament supply. So that's why it just goes straight out to this feed-through capacitor right to here. That is one side of the filament supply. Series strung set, so it goes into pin 3 on this tube, I think out on pin 4, and then over to this tube, and then back out somewhere. So off of this tube should be a similar deal, where it's a feed through. I think it's this guy. It goes to a pin that goes to nothing else but a wire going straight to a feed through cap. Alright, so now the question is, assuming I can get it out, how do I replace it? So it looks like I could actually just probably clip this off and get it down to where there's just a little thin piece of flat metal, and I can just push it through and it'll come out the other side. And I gotta hunt around junk boxes and try to find a similar looking miniature tube pin that I can insert in there, and then just tack that back in place. So if I just cut this off, forget about soldering, and then get the new pin in there, I can just just carefully get the soldering iron down in here and just melt this solder onto the new pin, and that should be that. Won't have to mess with any of this stuff. Success! I did just as I described. Got down in there and clipped off the filament lead, and then carefully pushed from the back side and pried a little bit from the top side and got it out. Chipped up the socket a little bit, but not too bad. Just a little bit of surface scraping there. So now I want to replace this guy, and I dug up a 9-pin socket I salvaged from I don't know what, and the pins look to be very similar. So I try to unsolder some of these and push them through from the back, and if they look good enough to reuse, I will go for it. Seemed the simplest way to go is simply smash the old socket apart. I have extracted one pin, cleaned it off, and it sure looks just like the old one. Now, there's a bit of a dimple on it, keep it from falling back out. I'm going to try to insert it with that dimple in place, but if it doesn't want to go in, I may have to flatten it out a little. This task would be a bit easier if this tube didn't have the shielding collar around it, or rather this tube socket, like this guy, but I think I can still manage. Get down there. Right now, ram it home. I hope. Try this tool. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. Gotta take some of that crimp out. Problem. Just give it a squeeze. There we go. And after it's in, I can always just bend it over to give it some more strength. Go. Alright. Bam. It is in there. And bend it over on the other side. Resolder that wire. And then start cleaning this up and putting it back together. Work out just fine. Grab a tube and give it one little test before I proceed. This isn't the actual tube that will go in there, but it's the same 7-pin type, and this is longer, so it gives me more to grip on. I think that is a successful repair. Well, once I solder it and get the tuner all back together, I guess it's a little premature to call it successful just yet. I got the tuner all cleaned up with a combination of electrical parts degreaser and contact cleaner and denatured alcohol and Q-tips. And then I applied some new lubricant to this, some lithium grease, and a little bit of very light oil. And I put the rotor back in for a test run, and it still was not rotating that fine tuning properly. Well, then I turned to the service manual, and I actually have a special section just on getting that fine-tuning disc to engage, and it turns out that I don't think this thing was ever assembled properly. These two discs are supposed to be separated, and they show in the diagram using razor blades to get them apart. And this brass piece is supposed to be in between those two, not bent over and riding against the back. So I think this thing may never have been assembled properly in the first place. You can see from the wear and the angle that this has been bent over for a very long time, and there's really no wear on the back of the disc. It's just on this side. So what I need to do is carefully straighten this out and then get it in between those discs, and I think everything will work much better. Hey, what do you know? When it's assembled properly, it actually works just fine. Alright, now I will proceed with applying some grease to these bearing points, and then reinstall the spring wires, get that roller ball back in the back here, and put the cover back on, and I can start wiring it back in, but not until I get back to the original task I had set out on, which was to rewire the power switch and this ground wire. Here it is, all cleaned and lubed and reassembled, and seems to be working just fine. Some fine-tuning action, and the channel clunker. So, just gotta pop the cover back on, stick back in the set, and put everything back together, and hopefully in the next installment I will actually try powering this TV back up again.